Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. Joining me on our episode to talk about NATO, to talk about Russia, Slovakia, and how the U.S. previously, maybe not so much anymore, has been trying to intervene in their sovereign affairs, and now how the EU is trying to suppress the positive development of Europe and of sovereign European states. Luboš Blaha is a Slovak politician, academic, and philosopher. He is a member of the National Council of the Slovak Republic, a presidium member of the left-wing populist party Direction Slovak Social Democracy, and Robert Fico, the Prime Minister of Slovak's foreign policy aide. Okay, he was previously a MP and Deputy Speaker of the National Council of Slovakia. So, done a lot, and you are doing more each and every day. Thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Blaha. How are you doing today?
Thank you for the invitation. I have a busy day, but I'm happy that I can be with you.
So tell me about what's going on. There's these NATO meetings right now. Zelensky is begging for more money. What is Slovakia's position on this?
Well, we are refusing this war hysteria in the European Union and in the collective West, and we are really fed up with this rearming, fed up with this hatred against Russia, fed up with this, saber-rattling, rebelling, and I think that the European Union changed a lot. The decades before, we were the project of peace, project of prosperity, and suddenly we are just war machine, and it resembles me the situation in 30s in the Nazi era, when everybody was talking about the war, about the arming, about the hatred against the Russia and Slavic nations, and also the hatred against the Jewish minority at the time. Now we have the new enemy. It's the Russians. I don't think that this is the good direction.
Do you think Europe even has the means to produce for Ukraine to wage war for any extended period of time if they wanted to against Russia?
Well, first of all, for Russia, it is the existential interest to defend their interest as regards the collective West. This conflict in the Ukraine, it started because of the expansion of NATO. Because it was not the Russian army, getting closer to the America in Mexico or in Canada. It was the American or the collective West armies spreading their influence towards the Russian borders. So the reaction was the conflict on Ukraine, and imagine for Americans, for Spanish, for French, it's just the war somewhere, far away. But for Russians, it's the war on their borders. And for them, it's much more important. So I don't believe that, European countries or even America can sustain this conflict forever. In the end, the Russians will win. They will win. And the question is if we can make some deal with Russians, or it will be the war. Because in this war, many Ukrainians and many Russians are dying, and this is not good. So we need to do everything to make possible the peace deal. And I think that the Europeans, especially the Western Europeans now, are doing everything for war. But it's not their war. It's not the war when their people are dying. It's the war where Ukrainians are dying. So if somebody has a bloody hands, it's now the leaders of the European Union.
Yes, and it's also a war where Europeans are being hit with huge economic hardship as a result of these frivolous sanctions on Russia. How has it impacted Slovakia?
Well, you can imagine we are very dependent on the energy sources, cheap energy sources from Russian Federation. This is something which is the situation for decades. After the Second World War, the Slovakia or Czechoslovakia at the time was the part of the Soviet bloc, and the dependency on the cheap energy sources was strong. And now it's the same. Many European countries, including Slovakia, Hungary, the Czech Republic, or Germany, are dependent on the cheap energy sources from Russia. And the German economic miracle after Second World War was based on this, and especially after the fall of the Soviet regime, it was based on the cheap energy from the Russian Federation and some export destinations in China. And now two pillars of German economy, and the German economy is the pillar of the European Union. The German economy is now, in the ruins because of these very, very irrational decisions. We are just trying to cut off Russian energies is a suicide, and we are just trying to, to say to giant Chinese that they have some problems with human rights. It's not our problem. We need to, foster our economy. So this is just childish policies. And I remember in the European Union or in the Western Europe, there were the beautiful politicians like Willy Brandt or Olof Palme or Bruno Kreisky. It was a beautiful era when somebody in the European Union was using their crank. Suddenly we are in the era that the people, because of these ideological reasons, because of this hatred against Russia, people in the leadership of the European Union is using self-suicidal means, and this is not good. Really not good. The sanctions against Russia are against us. Are not, hurting Russians. They're hurting Europeans, and this is just insane.
And there's a big question about the resumption of Russian gas flow to the European Union. How is Brussels dealing with this matter? How is Slovakia dealing with this matter, as well as Hungary and Austria? And at what point, do countries like Austria, Hungary, and Slovakia say, this is madness? Why are we still a part of this organization where we have no, we have no freedom, we have no voice? They're withholding our EU funds. They're canceling elections in Romania. I mean, it's crazy.
It's a very interesting, important question. In Slovakia, we are still more and more in kind of neo-colonial position in the European Union. And everybody is starting to talk about this because, as I said before, European Union before was the project of kind of economic cooperation. It was really good. Trade cooperation. Yes, this is a beautiful idea, but suddenly it's kind of, we are running to some federation. In this federation, only the big stakeholders has the important voice. I mean, the Germany or maybe France, and especially the Brussels Euro technocrats. But nobody is interested in the voice of the small nations and small countries like Slovakia is, or Hungary, or Czech Republic, and so on. So now we are in a very difficult situation because we are economically dependent on the European market. We are totally dependent. So that I would say on German, Netherlands, or Austrian corporations. So that's very hard to just cut off European Union if we would like to. But we need to speak about this and talk about this because such negative decisions like this with the sanctions against Russia, energy sanctions, it is just so irrational. If the European Union is going to cut off all the energy sources from Russian Federation. Imagine in Slovakia, we are 90% depend on the Russian oil. From even more, we had 90% oil. It's like 75% gas, and it's 100% of nuclear basement or core. Nuclear core is the English expression. So and now in this situation, if we cut off Russian energy sources, it's just it's just suicide. We will not exist anymore, or we will pay 2 or 3 or 4 times more for the gas from the United States, from these other sources, and we will be dependent on the United States. So again, the dependency. So this is just irrational. And if you talk this or tell this to these European leaders, they will tell you, but we are in the war against Russia. We need to save Ukraine. We need to have this ideology. This is not a common sense. It's about ideology. They just hate Russia. This is the new ideology of European Union, like in the 30s or 40s when Adolf Hitler was talking the same language. I cannot agree with this. So yes, there is the issue again. If, for example, the neutrality and some kind of different arrangement with NATO is in the game or is on the table, and there is still more and more Eurosceptica in Slovakia. But for now, we are there and we are trying to negotiate the best positions. This is the situation now.
Mm-hmm. As of right now, it seems like Europe and the United Kingdom, the EU and the United Kingdom are the main agitators who are encouraging Zelensky to continue this proxy war against Russia. Do you know whether or not the United States, who seemingly, has wanted it into this, maybe things are changing, but, they've wanted it into this, they've wanted normalization up until recently. Have they been making any efforts with sovereign entities, with sovereign states inside of the EU, as Donald Trump promised when he came into office, to work on this matter and maybe even other matters related to your own domestic issues, negotiating with sovereign states rather than the EU?
Yes, we had a lot of expectations of Donald Trump becoming the president, because the Joe Biden, it was the catastrophe. It was the catastrophe. He was the warmonger against Russia, and it was really bad. But now the situation is very complicated. There are some decisions of Donald Trump which I really can agree, especially in domestic issues, but still, as regards the international issues, we expected that he will be the president of the peace. After the invasion or attack on Iran, it was Iran. It was the breach of the international law, and suddenly everybody in the European Union is talking that they are applauding to this decision. When there's the conflict in the Ukraine started, everybody's blaming Russians like, they are the huge enemy, they are the monsters because they invaded the sovereign state and they breached the international law. And suddenly, the Americans and the Israelis are breaching the international law. Israelis are waging the genocide against Palestine, and Americans are waging the invasion to Iran. Everything is okay. Everything is great. This is the hypocrisy, and that's why it's a disappointment what Donald Trump is doing now. But still, I think that I've never idealized Donald Trump, but I think that his conservative party, part of this Republican Party, they just want to stop the war in Ukraine because they don't want to wage war on many fronts. They cannot wage the war against Russia. Their priority is the war against China and against Iran. So it's not a good reason why they want to stop the war. This is the strategic reason for them. And you just need to read the foreign affairs and the experts from this Republican Party. They just want to wage war against Chinese, and they know that they have no capacity now, so they need to be stronger and stronger, and they need the time. So this is the only reason why they are trying to make some peace arrangements in Ukraine, for example. Now they want to solve very fast the situation in Iran and Israel because they know that they need the energy against China. This is their thinking. This is my interpretation based on these foreign affairs interviews. But still, as regards Russians, I believe that the only chance to have a peace in Ukraine is dialogue. Is dialogue with Russians. That's why we were, together with some MEPs from European Parliament, but also with the Prime Minister Robert Fico, in Russia many times in the last months. And we were talking to Russian politicians, including the deputies from the Duma, including some very important persons like Mr. Narishkin, who is the chief, or he's the director of this intelligence in Russia. Also the chief of the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Slutsky, or the chairman of the Communist Party, which is the main opposition party, Mr. Zyuganov. I met a lot of people, and they are prepared for dialogue, but they expect that the West will respect their positions, that they really had a problem with the expansion of the West and NATO towards the borders. And they really had, big problems with the Ukrainian regime, which was Banderistas regime. Maybe in America, it's not so important to know what is Banderistas, who were Banderistas. But these neo-Nazis or these Nazis during the Second World War were killing the people also in Slovakia, also in Poland, also in Ukraine now. They were killing the Jews and Polish and Slovak people in thousands. It was like maybe 100,000 of people really tortured and killed in the most brutal way by these Banderistas. And we see that in Ukraine now there are the statues of Mr. Bandera, who was the leader of these Banderistas, or Sushevich and others, who were the war criminals. Nazis, fascists. And, from a Russian point of view, you can imagine in the Second World War, they lost maybe three dozens of millions of people. Soviet Union, when they were liberating the Europe because of the invasion of Germans and so on. So they have a lot of emotion in this. And suddenly in the Ukraine, these neo-Nazis and this new regime has the same rhetorics against Russia like Banderistas before. And it is very, very, important for them to defend their interest in this. So that's why I think that the only chance is to make a dialogue, not a war, the dialogue with Russia. But yes, I can see that Mr. Trump is prepared for this dialogue, maybe in some kind of naive way, because it's not a real diplomacy. It is the type of diplomacy like, I will tell you how it will be, and it will be like this. But this cannot be valid on the Russians. They are superpower. But in the end, yes, this is much better than the Europeans, the Western Europeans, who are just talking about war. You cannot defeat Russia. Russia is the nuclear superpower. How can you defeat the nuclear superpower? It's impossible. So that's why I'm talking that there is no common sense now in the realism in the European politics now. It's just this progressive ideology. And my last remark: Russia is the symbol for decades. With Mr. Putin on its head, Russia is a symbol of this traditional, more conservative thinking, family, nation, like mutuality, maybe even Slavic brotherhood, something like this, okay? But for the Western Europe, this is the, anathema. This is the main threat, because they are progressives. They are talking only about LGBT rights. They are talking only about this multiculturalism and about migration. And, with this Mr. Putin and Russia, it's just the main enemy, ideological enemy. It's not about geopolitics. They want to wage war against Russia because of this. They hate him because Putin is traditional, and they hate everything traditional. They are like, progressive fanatics. They wage the jihad against Russia because of this, and we really need to refuse this. We in Slovakia are more conservative, more traditional. We don't want this progressive, bullshit. We just want to defend our interests and our traditional values. That's our interest.
It's a very good interest. One thing I left out of your bio at the start of this conversation that I find very interesting, and this is from, the internet, so who knows, but it says that you are a Marxist, and I'm a card-carrying member of the American Communist Party, but, the Western mainstream media would lead me to believe that if you are a Marxist, or if this informs your worldview in some capacity, that you, as an aide to Mr. Fico, there'd be some contradiction there, because they say he's a far-right winger and you're a Marxist, which, according to the Western mainstream media, that means LGBT, diversity, all this stuff. How does that apparent contradiction manifest in reality for you?
I can show you my books. This is my book about Che Guevara. So you can. This is a very new book. So I can. This is the confirmation that I'm still the Marxist, and this is my book, The Anti-Globalist. It's a kind of leftist anti-globalism, Marxist anti-globalism. Well, I will tell you, there is a new stream in the left wing or Marxist thinking, this neo-Marxism or this kind of post-Marxism, and this is really dangerous. And it has nothing in common with traditional Marxism-Leninism, I would say. If Che Guevara would see that, or Lenin or Marx would see that the main priority of the socialist movement in the West is the LGBT movement, he would be turning in his grave, because this is nonsense. The left wing, or traditional left wing, I would say, because the left wing in America means something liberal. I don't really like it, but still, in Slovakia, the left means like you want to defend workers, you want to defend the strong state, to help the poor people and to make some balance in the society. This was the Marxist idea or the socialist idea. Like there was nothing about LGBT, nothing about migration, nothing about this kind of sexual experiments and such progressive liberal ideas. And I really wrote a book about Che Guevara. I've never seen in his writings or speeches something about LGBT. He was talking about the imperialism. He was talking about global capitalism, like ruining the third world, the global south. He was against the American wars. This was Che Guevara or these normal Marxist thinkers. So that's why this new kind of post-Marxism has nothing in common with typical left or typical socialist movement or the workers movement. And I am the traditional socialist and or traditional Marxist. But sometimes I need to be really ashamed by this new progressive wave in this Marxism, and I'm really am. And that's why sometimes, and this is very interesting, also in my country and the Central European countries, we have a lot of in common with this, as you said, far rights or conservative, national conservatives, because in some issues like the war and peace, like the issue of globalization, like the issue of the national sovereignty, like the issue of this anti-progressivism, we have the same grounds. We are on the same maybe from the different reason. The reason for the national conservatives, the reason is maybe their love for country, love for the nation, love for the traditions, love for some conservatism. In our stances, I mean the left wing, we are against this global capitalism, global capital, libertarianism, individualism, and so on. So, but in the end, we can be together against this, liberal extremism, or I would say this liberal fascism, as I call it, because this is the real enemy for us today. We need to fight against wars, against the imperialism, against these inequalities in the world, and this is our stance. So that's why I believe that we need to return to Marx, but not in this rainbow way, but in a really traditional way, and we need to come back to this workers' interest. I mean the small people. All the small people, not only manual workers, but all the poor people who are the victims of this regime, of this progressive neoliberal regime. And I hope that we can be together also with the national conservatives in this.
It seems to me, and I'm looking at this from afar, but when I look at the political movements in Europe right now, the right wing, especially when it comes to foreign policy, is a mixed bag. They might say we don't want war with Russia, but then when push comes to shove, maybe they back down on that position a little bit and don't even get us started on the Middle East, what they think about the Middle East, right? It seems like there is this, and not in Slovakia, I'm not saying this, but, in France, for example, or some other countries, it seems like there is a bit of a fake anti-imperialist, anti-intervention strain that comes across on the right. But you don't see that with you, at least, because you are principled anti-imperialist, I'd assume, and you're opposed to all these things. What do you think is allowing for these movements, the right-wing movements in Europe, to be so successful, despite the fact that they are not principled and they oftentimes do not hold their ground when they get close to positions of power?
Well, I'm very disappointed with this far-right movement, as I can say, or this right-wing movement, as you said, in France, for example, because, in many issues we have a common ground, as I said, but suddenly they are, defending Israel in their genocide. They are defending Israel in their breaching the international law, and they are so furious in this. They are so radical in this that, I'm just vomiting from it's just you cannot explain this. They are totally unprincipled, and that's why, yes, we are disappointed. But to be, it's kind of irony, because I remember father of Mrs. Le Pen, and he was a really strict anti-Semite, and suddenly she is the strongest voice for Zionism, and this is for me absolutely I cannot understand this. Well, but I think that this is not the main issue. For France, the main issue is their, reservations against this Muslim population in France, because in France there is a strong basement of this Muslim population. They have the problems with this. I cannot imagine. We in Slovakia, we don't have any Muslims because we were very strict as regards when there was the refugee crisis. We said we don't want to have any refugees here because we need to save and we need to defend our traditions, our Slovakia, because we are small nation and we don't need this multicultural project as it is in France or Sweden, and it's a real disaster. So that's why we are in different position. I can imagine that in France it can be different. For me, I'm defending, for example, Palestinians. I'm defending the Iranians. It's not about Islam for me. It's about their right for sovereignty, their right for self emancipation, and so on. But in France, for Le Pen, it's maybe the cultural war of against Muslim people. I don't know. But I am really disappointed. This is not my stance. The truth is that America and Israel now is the main threat for the peace in the world, and I think that this is the main principle we need to follow. It was not Iran, and I'm not a defender of Iran. I'm not Muslim. I am atheist. I don't like maybe the regime in Iran, but still it's a sovereign state, and it was not Iran who invaded the neighbors. Iran never invaded any country. It was only Israel in the last, I think, 6 months. They invaded 5 countries: Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Yemen, and now Iran. So 5 countries in 5 months. It's just a Guinness record. And Americans who are trying to say about themselves that we are the beautiful peacemakers. Donald Trump is using these words, but they are invading one country after another. In the last 60 years, it was like 2,000 of countries they invaded after the Second World War, and they are trying to say that Americans and Israelis are these good guys and Iranians are the bad guys. This is nonsense. This is not the truth. That's why I believe that we need a new balance in the world, and this new balance can be created only on the base of power. You cannot do it in ideology. And if you need counter this American or Israelis or Western imperialism, you need to be strong. And I see that this new unity, this new parity of strongness is creating in these BRICS countries, or this BRICS alliance. Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, together with other countries which are joining this BRICS alliance now, together with Iran. So I think that maybe this could be an alternative. Maybe in the future, and I can see the Chinese are growing and rising really fast, and Russians are strong, and Indians are very, very strong as well. So I think this can be a kind of counterbalance against this Western arrogance. I think that maybe you imagine from history or you remember in history this 19th century, this concert of powers. It was the only period of dozens of years of peace in the European continent. Almost all the 19th century, with the exceptions of Crimea War, it was about peace between the superpowers or powers at the time. And it can be possible also in the world if you have one bloc, for example, a strong bloc of America and other Western countries, and this new bloc of the BRICS countries. If they are in the balance, it can bring the peace. It is also the argument of Kenneth Waltz. He's one of the few most famous scholars in the international relations, but also of John Mearsheimer and others who are very strong on this argument. The balance is the only guarantee for peace, and that's why sometimes you need to defend this right of these countries like China or Russia or Iran to defend their interests. It is good for the balance in the world, and that's why I'm doing this.
I fully agree. And I think that's a perfect note to wrap up on. Gives everyone something to think about at the end. So, Luboš Blaha, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people follow along with you moving forward, and where can they purchase those books? I hope you got English translations over
this
there.
Is in English. Yeah, this is in English. This will be very soon in Russian, so maybe something for you. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and hasta siempre.